Hello.
Good evening on a Sunday night, and this is a weekend of Shed 7 playing at Leeds Millennium Square.
That was yesterday, Saturday.
That correct. So and announcing a new album as well. Only a matter of time before that comes out in January. And
Well, it's called a matter of time, isn't it?
It is. It is. So that's the local news, which we'll pass on quickly, but we'll come back to that. Looking hopefully to try and even persuade maybe Rick Woodard to come on and do a chat with us on our podcast at some point, which would
That'd
be good.
Nice.
Yeah, exactly. So haven't put him under that question yet, but I'd like to do so. Now, Graham, however, I am really intrigued by where you've been this weekend because much as we go on about Yorkshire, you tell us where you've been.
I need to interrupt straight away because Derek Malcolm has died. You know Derek Malcolm,
the great film critic Derek Malcolm.
Well, he was at the Guardian for decades, and he's died at the age of 91.
Yes.
And we used to sit next to him at films at Edinburgh National Film Festival quite regularly because in the glory days of the 90s and before, there'd be him and Philip French and all the top national journalists, all the film critics up there in Edinburgh reviewing the films at the same time we were. And it's really sad that he's gone because he had super high standards and really intelligent writer. And he also wasn't influenced by the film companies or by popular fashion or audiences. He said what he thought in an intelligent fashion and couldn't be budged from that.
Which would apply to Philip French as well. I mean, I think we look back as, I mean, I know everyone talks about a golden era of this and a golden era of that, but their film reviewing was of a standard that one always impeccably, not even going to use the word tasteful, just impeccably well-judged film reviewing. And I'm not saying that there isn't still strong film reviewing taking place, but it's interesting that now there's more of a cult surrounding it, which of course would be Kermode and Mayo, who've become as much as stars as the films they review. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong in that, but I think that's a sign again of the times that we live in, which are more orientated towards celebrity, and more celebrity. When in some ways, I'm quite sure that Philip French and Derek Malcolm would prefer for their work to be the beautiful written word. And if people didn't even know who they were walking down the street, they would have been more than happy with that.
Yeah, they weren't looking to have their own TV series. Although, ironically, in his later years, Derek Malcolm did turn up.
He did
on a Sky Arts, doing profiles or being part of a profile of various famous actors and film directors. And we once sat next to him at Bill Forsyth's film Being Human, starring Ron Williams, about 1994, which was his big crack at doing a big budget American movie. But by Forsyth's standards, he's a brilliant director. It was a bit sort of like it told the story of one man throughout the history of mankind, with Robin Williams playing the character every time. So it was slightly pretentious by Bill Forsyth's standards. And I remember like me sitting next to Derek Malcolm, and I turned to him and said, "What do you think, Derek?" And he said, I thought it was rubbish." And I said, "Well, I thought it was quite good." I said, I think if it had been made by a Swedish film director with subtitles, you might have thought the same thing. And he didn't look too happy when I challenged his opinion.
Well, I don't actually think Being Human has aged particularly well as a film, Graham. Whereas Local Hero has been reactivated, looked at again and again, and that's perhaps a more fitting testimony. But a director is allowed, after all, to take risks, to experiment, to broaden the scope. And you can't get much bigger than calling a film Being Human and trying to capture the whole essence of humanity, albeit through Robin Williams, not Robbie Williams.
That's true. Now, there's a thought.
Well, it is. Now, Graham, so we say thank you for the great film reviewing of Derek Malcolm, and God rest in peace, and thank you for that. And Graham, you've been across, you've taken that risk, you've crossed the Pennines, you've gone to Manchester, to the Manchester International Festival. Leeds, I think, is determinedly having its festival this year because it didn't get what Bradford got and has decided. But Manchester never seems to have that problem or an ego clash against Liverpool. They're just quite happy to have magnificently big events in both.
And Leeds doesn't. It's the same as football. Manchester gets the money and Leeds doesn't.
Well, Leeds still is having a festival this year, Graham. You might not have noticed it, which might be
No,
a problem.
that's true. No, I know that. I know. And I mean, not as big as Manchester.
No, I accept that point.
It's laden with creativity and ideas, but also money. And the latest example of that is that the people behind the Manchester National Festival, who've done a fantastic job since it was launched, they've built their own festival venue complex, which was going to be called Factory International, inspired by the factory venue that the late Tony Wilson set up with New Order.
Yeah.
But it's now called Aviva Studios, home of Factory International, since Aviva promised to sponsor it to the tune of, was it 25 million or 36 million? Anyway, the reason I went the weekend was to see Alison Goldrapp perform a solo gig at Aviva Studios, home of Factory International, which meant I could be at the International Festival. I could see the venue for the first time, which has only opened recently, and also see Alison Goldrapp becoming disco queen. So it ticked 3 boxes at the same time. So it was extremely interesting to go and see her there in that new building.
So first things first, Alison Goldrapp, just to remind our listeners, Alison Goldrapp has done the new album called The Love Invention. First album without Mr. Gregory at her side. And so obviously I think there was interest in then interpreting how she would do the songs again without Williams' involvement, how it became the more the Alison Goldrapp show, a love reinvention, if you like. So how did she go about doing that, Graham?
Well, Goldfrapp have always changed. I mean, they started off a bit sort of like cinematic, and then they went sort of electro clash, electro punk disco. Then they went a bit psych folk. Then they went a bit pop. Then they went a little bit disco. And now as Alison Goldrapp solo, the new album portrays her entirely as a disco queen.
Yeah.
But in a very intelligent, slick, sophisticated. This isn't Sophie Ellis Bextor. This isn't like Dancing Around Your Handbags. This is like European style, slightly cool, very well structured, very, very sophisticated disco. So I thought, what's she going to be like live? And it turns out live, she's only got a 2-piece band behind her, a female keyboard player and a very energetic drummer. So you're never quite sure how much of it is live and how much of it is live instrumentation, how much is actually samples and electronics. And she appears like a disco queen, dressed like a disco queen. She's got like long, slick back blonde hair. She's got really huge black shoulder pads from which cascades a waterfall of glittering silver. So she really looks the part straight away. But the interesting thing about the venue, and I'll say more about the venue in a minute, is that the hall we saw her in with fantastic rigging and sound system. Although it's quite a wide room, it was a very shallow room. So I've never been so close to an important live act in my life, except for the Broodnell Social Club in Leeds. Because when she started, I could actually see what looked like nerves in her eyes. She looked quite nervous.
Yeah.
And I suddenly realized, my God, I must be much closer. And I think because I can actually see the look in her eyes. And so at first it was a bit slightly sort of like, is she a disco queen or is she still Alison Goldrapp? It was sort of in between. It was like perfectly fine. It all went exceedingly well. And the live versions of the songs off the album are actually better than the album, I think, because there's more oomph. Whereas the album is so slick and sophisticated, it's just lacking a bit of punch. Well, live has got more punch because the drummer drums like a madman, and the female keyboard player, who played guitar at one point and came out front doing a lot of posing, she's full of life as well. So it was really punchy. But I still thought, well, she doesn't totally look like she's settled into this role. She's not like Roisin Murphy, who I saw last year at Manchester, who's totally comfortable being a disco queen on stage. I thought, has she got it? And then it sort of turned because she started injecting a few Goldfrapp numbers from sort of like Ooh La La days and Supernature and things like that. And she seemed to relax. Once she got the Goldfrapp numbers in, she then seemed to relax into the role. And before you knew it, she was like coming alive. And I haven't seen Alison Goldrapp, and I've seen her 6 times live since 2002 in every gigs they've had. I've never seen her act so less icy and engage with the crowd so much. At one point, she was chatting to people in the crowd for about 4 minutes.
Yeah,
she was really, despite her looks, very informal and very human, and it sort of like G'd the crowd up. And before you knew it, it became quite an extraordinary gig. It really heated up as it went on.
So new venue. This was a standing or seating venue, Graham?
Well, being a new venue, it was flexible. But this occasion was a standing venue. Everybody was standing, and the crowd was predominantly from the LGBT community, which makes no difference to me whatsoever. But it made it quite a colourful gig because some of the crowd were like dressed even more outlandishly than Alison Goldrapp herself. So I was definitely Mr. Plain standing there in the crowd.
Mr. Plain.
The rest of the crowd.
So in terms of the how the design of this new venue is, does it look just pretty conventional as a music venue? Or does it have a futuristic hint to it?
No, it doesn't look conventional. No, I mean it's called Factory International, and it pays more than lip service to its roots in the Factory, the original 90s classic legendary 90s venue, where Madonna played when she was not that famous.
Yeah, before she was famous.
It's basically an old building from Manchester's industrial era, transformed into a giant arts complex, and it's bold of design. It's not a shilly-shally, moderate design, and it keeps the Factory look in the sense that the ceiling, when you walk indoors, it's quite a big space where you can sit around waiting to go to the actual different rooms and venues themselves. And the space has exposed ceiling with all that industrial silver piping. It's got the brickwork, the original brickwork, and it's got pillars just like the Factory venue was in the 1950s. But, and this is where it gets a bit more alarming, sadly, because it's where you eat and drink and wait to get admittance to the actual venues, and it's got a very long, very useful bar where you get served quickly, because it's got seating and it's got like primary coloured tables and chairs of a sort of like functional, semi-industrial nature, it clutters up the look of the room. So rather than it looking like a perfect Factory design, it looks like this is quite harsh on something which I think it cost £210 million to transform into Factory National. But sadly, it looked a little bit like a talented child had been asked to reproduce the Pompidou Centre from Paris in this old industrial space. It just looked cluttered, and it didn't, as a design, it didn't hang together. I don't think it was totally well thought through.
That was what the necessities of being able to provide food and drink, though, presumably. That's where the complication comes, that you've got to address all that in order for a venue to thrive. It has to always be rather more than just one thing. Beer's always been hugely important at gigs. Food's become part of it as well. Much as when people go to sporting occasions, that side of it's very important as well now, rather than just going to a venue for a good time and maybe having a pint or whatever. But it's become much more than just going to a gig now, hasn't it? So maybe it's having to play to that.
Well, I agree with that, because it was a useful place to be. You got a seat, you got a drink quickly. It was spacious. It looked fun. So it was pleasant. If we weren't pretentious people and just cared about having a good time, it was a good time place. And what made it even more of a good time place was the breakout space before you got inside the actual room with the food and drink. The breakout space is massive, with tables and chairs, outdoor bars, outdoor food points, a covered live stage area. The breakout space was superb. And the great thing about breakout space was that you didn't need a gig ticket to go to the breakout space. But if you were going to the gig, you could then walk out of the venue into the breakout space with your drink and come backwards and forwards. So in terms of being useful as a crowd member for having a good time, the place really worked. I mean, the breakout space had almost more people than the actual gig. People seemed to like hanging around. It was a great place to hang around and have a drink and chat and eat.
Was that partly, Graham, because it's the international festival, and so as with any festival, you have meeting places before and after shows. Was that why it was busy, or is that actually going to be something you think that will always be the case there?
Well, it might have been partly to do with the festival, but I think it was just a really nice place to sit around. It was a nice place to sit around indoors, and it was an even nice place to sit around chatting and drinking outdoors. It just really worked as a space in which to socialise, drink and eat. My worry with the whole thing is as a venue.
Yeah.
Because Manchester's full of venues.
It is.
And so the International Festival built this expensive new multi-venue art centre. But in what way is it better for the theatrical performances and the musical performances that went on in venues in the rest of Manchester? That's what I didn't get. I didn't see the benefit to the National Festival having the venue. And also you can become a member for, a reasonable price a year, but it promises to deliver extraordinary every day. And I thought, how, with so many other venues in Manchester offering great arts all year round, how is the Viva Studios home of Factory International going to offer those extraordinary experiences on a regular basis in a city packed with great arts? I didn't get that. And the final problem I thought with the venue was it was no Royal Opera House. And if the English National Opera was to move to that venue, well, people who pay big money for opera, the sponsors and the audience, they don't want to look like a romper room influenced by the Pompidou
No, they do not.
in Paris mixed with Factory in 1980s Manchester. They want something classy. And if I was an opera sponsor, unless it was avant-garde opera, I would think, there's no way I'm coming to this place. It's not suitable.
I think the answer to that remains the fact that the work that's been put in by Opera North at the Leeds Grand Theatre, obviously there's already the Howard Assembly Room there, but restaurants there, better facilities for all the people that work at Opera North. Loads of money's gone into that, increasing the actual building space within it. To me, that is a far more sensible project to back us for opera in the North than trying to sort of tag it on somewhere in Manchester. I do actually think that Leeds needs to stand up against this. I think Manchester dominating over Leeds is not healthy and not necessary. It took Leeds an eternity to get the Leeds Arena. It took so long to get that. That was outrageous in itself that it took so long. And Leeds has to be stronger about this. Stand up for what it's got.
Yeah, but as we've discussed many times before, it isn't just that Leeds needs more money. It's that Leeds itself has to embrace its own artiness more than it does, because Leeds is so good old-fashioned Yorkshire.
Yeah.
The art side of it, although it's got much stronger in the last 20 years, incredibly so, is still dwarfed by that Yorkshire in a way that Manchester isn't. Manchester has no fear of being arty or being flamboyant or being pretentious. Leeds has still got that reserve about behaving like that. And Leeds' problem in terms of the arts is partly of his own making. It isn't just financial, it's an attitude. And Manchester has a different attitude towards it than Leeds does.
So the perception of Manchester is perhaps more positive than the perception of Leeds, and that in some ways is more complicated, therefore, for Leeds to fight its case. And it was significant, of course, that Leeds rejected for what actually Bradford ended up becoming the city of culture, and Leeds as a response decided to have its own festival, not just because it had been snubbed, but because actually it wanted to celebrate Leeds. And I still think that was the right thing to do, to celebrate Leeds. I think it's important to do that. Just as I'm delighted with the fact that Bradford will be the city of culture, and that momentum is going to be very interesting for Yorkshire overall. I think Hull was perhaps being on the coast. Much as I enjoyed the year of Hull City of Culture, there was always that thing of how many people actually were going to come across all the way. Bradford is that much more central, but of course it's then got the problem of that you've got to go through Leeds for a railway system. So in fact, Bradford is as hamstrung as parts of Yorkshire yet again. Manchester, of course, never ever has that problem.
No, but Leeds nearly needs to change its views about itself. It really needs to change its own persona and become a bit more. Leeds to me doesn't feel international when I visit Leeds, but when I visit Manchester, it feels more international. I do not know why. And when I was in Waterstones yesterday in Manchester, there's a section to books about Manchester, and there's loads of books about Manchester, bigging up Manchester, and a lot of them are linked to the Factory and Joy Division and New Order in the fall. But there's loads of them. Go to Waterstones in Leeds, and where you got like books about the countryside round Leeds or the Yorkshire Dales. Leeds does not embrace its own artistic heritage loudly and proudly enough to create that sort of image, which then attracts more money and more people and more talent. And Leeds still has to go a bit further down the road of changing itself before it gets
Manchester has
Manchester.
I think it's the Manchester Festival is yearly, I think, isn't it, for the International Festival? Leeds is a one-off.
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years in Manchester. Forgive me for that.
So.
But even then, Leeds is a one-off. So there is a considerable difference there in philosophy towards the arts.
But that's a start, though. If the first one goes well, it may continue.
It is a start. And as I say, obviously the Leeds Playhouse being regenerated, and we've had obviously the college being set up next door. We've had the redevelopment of the Quarry Hill area, which is ongoing. And so there is progress within that, and there are new arts venues that open within the city. There are more music venues opening within Leeds. But it is a battle against Manchester in some ways. But I just hope that battle accelerates and Leeds continues to take that on. Now, Graham,
Leeds is definitely going in the right direction. That's for sure.
I think that's a fair point to say that. Absolutely. This year, you're contesting that albums are making a comeback this year. But was it all the fault of HMV's stocking policy in the first place? Now, that's an interesting point. Are you saying that HMV simply was holding back on albums, or that HMV wasn't stocking albums in the right way, or also was COVID a factor as well in delaying album releases, or actually has it just been a remarkable year, which it has, I think, in a combination of new acts and established acts? Loads and loads of albums have been coming out. I can't even keep up with it this year.
No, now the problem for me is that, I could go shopping because, I stick to hard copy forms of music consumption. I don't do streaming, which makes me an old-fashioned person. So I could go to Jumbo Records in Leeds, or I could go to Crash Records in Leeds to get my CDs and occasionally vinyl. But I don't, because Harrogate's got an HMV, and I'm very loyal to the Harrogate HMV, because if that goes, that means I'm forced to travel to Leeds the whole time. But the first half of the year was so bad for new albums. I think I only bought about 3 or 4 albums that came out, and the only one that was really good was David Bruce's The Soft Struggles on Field Music's label Daylight Savings. And I thought, this is a bad year for music, but it wasn't really a bad year for music. It was more that I couldn't get my hands on albums that came out at HMV because they weren't stocking them. So, for example, Young Father's brilliant album Heavy Heavy, that came out about 4 months ago. It's only just turned up in recent weeks in HMV Harrogate. I tried to get Graham Chanton's debut solo album for Pontains DC, Chaos for the Fly, which came out about 2 weeks ago, in Harrogate HMV, and they're not stocking that at all. They are stocking PG Harvey's new album, I Inside the Old Year Dying, at Harrogate HMV, which is on Partisan Records, which is the same label as Graham Chanton's album's on. But for some reason, they're not stocking Graham Chanton's album. And so when I was at Manchester the weekend, I went to Piccadilly Records, that great independent music shop in Manchester, and I got my hands on Graham Chanton's new album. I also got Hamish Hawk's album, Angel Numbers, which again came out early in the year, which again Harrogate HMV didn't stock. So obviously I've played both those albums, and they're both great albums, especially Hamish Hawk's album. So I've suddenly thought, wait a minute, the first half of the year actually had quite a lot of good new albums by acts that aren't heritage acts, that haven't been going for since the 1960s or 70s, in which aren't written about that much by Uncut or Mojo, because Uncut and Mojo just focus so much on the old heritage acts. And I sort of realised that my view of the whole year's album release had been skewed by shopping at HMV in Harrogate. That's what I've realised over the weekend.
It's without naming names in HMV in York, in conversations that I have, I think there's probably even frustration amongst HMV staff about what they are able to stock or not. And they might well wish to have a wider choice than they do. And it's a challenge for them. I mean, you can order albums there, but that's not ideal. But I am still, for example, waiting for Teardrop Explodes Culture Bunker 1972-82, which is out on UMC.
Yeah, but I've noticed that.
It is more than £100, so I'm probably going to take out a mortgage to get it. But that's the kind of thing that it's really difficult for HMV to get. Don't know why that is, but that is the case. However, just to run through some recent albums that you can get there: Cowboy Junkies, Lloyd Cole's new album, Laura Cantrell's album, James's album, Lucinda Williams' new album, Stories from a Rock and Roll Highway, Rufus Wainwright's new album, Drive By Truckers re-release of the complete Dirty South New West, This is the Kit's new album. You're able to get there. Bennett Wilson Poole, which is the guy that has been in many different bands as Mr. Wilson, Danny Wilson, and you can get Jenny Lewis's new album there. So you will find lots of new albums there, Graham. I think maybe there are some difficulties in it. And you just have to keep an eye on these things. I do think it becomes more difficult for HMV. The access to these things, how many copies of some albums that they're given are really, really limited. That creates a problem as well. And it maybe you're just going to have to accept, Graham, that you are actually going to have to travel to get albums.
Oh yeah, I realise that day is coming at some point, because if HMV ever goes as a national chain, you'll have to, if you want anything physically that isn't delivered via Amazon or whatever, you're going to have to make a trek to Leeds or Manchester or whatever. But I'm putting that day off as long as I can. But I would say the albums I've got recently, which are new albums, I judge new albums as by an act that formed 20 years ago or less. I don't judge a new album as being by acts that were formed in the 80s or 90s or 70s or 60s, because otherwise...
I think you're telling me off, Graham, for the list I gave you about groups.
Yeah, well,
a lot of
James,
whom have clearly been about
about
my age, basically, aren't they?
Yeah, James aren't a new band, are they? You can't call James a new band.
I take that point.
But I tell you what, Young Fella's album is brilliant, and Graham Chapman's solo album is actually better than Fontaine's DC, in my opinion.
Well, I'm predicting that this is going to create a very interesting situation with Fontaine's DC as to whether he actually decides, unlike Alex Turner sticking with his band Arctic Monkeys, it'll be interesting to see what happens. There is friction between the members apparently of Fontaine's DC, and maybe he's already found a way to express himself in a way that he's going to find more satisfying. So watch this space on that one.
I would say one thing to that. Although Graham Chapman's album is very good, it's not that much more commercial than Fontaine's DC. It's not quite as intense or heavy as Fontaine's DC, but it has got melodies, but it's not going to get him he's not going to become like Beyonce or Ed Sheeran with that sort of style of music. So I hope it is successful, but I can't see him being a global superstar with that sort of music.
No, possibly not. So, Graham, any recommendations of any new acts, though? You mentioned, I mean, you can't call field music a new act, but obviously Dave Bruce doing his own album has been an interesting development with him doing that. But any new discoveries that you've made? I mean, clearly, I've just read out a list of albums that are not new discoveries. Oh, I forgot to even put Dexys Midnight Runners, or Dexys are now about to release their new album. That's just me of a certain age, and I'm loyal to bands that I've loved all through the years. So I try occasionally, add to that list. But anything that you can recommend that you've discovered that's new?
No, but there is a great Leeds band at Leeds Festival coming up, which I can't remember the name of, who are actually only about 20 years old or 21 years old, and they're playing the BBC Introducing Stage on the Friday. At Leeds Festival. Can't remember the name now, but I looked at them on their Facebook page, etc. Played some of the videos and some of the live stuff, and I thought, oh, they're actually good. They've actually got some character and some tunes. So the next time we have this, I'll actually name the band, because obviously any band you talk about whose name you can't even remember is fairly damn useless.
We may just have to mention them in the next one if you
exactly.
Graham, so this is it, right. Here is your proposal. As you know, I'm no great Tom Cruise fan, but he is actually, as you suggest, maybe for a second year running, he could well be saving Hollywood. This time, of course, is the latest Mission Impossible film. Or is it a Mission Impossible?
Dead Reckoning Part 1.
A terrible pun, which you're forgiven for. When is the release date of Mission Impossible? Because we're all obviously far more excited at the moment about Barbie and Oppenheimer, and the people are going to see two films in one day. From Friday, they're going to crash into both those films, very contrasting films. When is Mission Impossible, or have I missed the fact that it's opened already?
It's just opened this weekend, and I've just seen it. I saw it about an hour ago at the Odeon in Harrogate.
Now, of course, I mean, it is phenomenal, actually, to do a Top Gun and a Mission Impossible. The intensity of that working arrangement for Tom Cruise has been phenomenal. Are the result? I mean, Top Gun, obviously, huge takings. How does it look for Mission Impossible? What's your instinct on this one?
Well, as you know, I'm a man who likes both, intellectual, trendy films and serious films and silly films, and I like some formula films. I don't really like CGI films in general. I don't like Marvel and DC comic inspired superhero films and fantasy films at all. I can't stand Avatar, even though James Cameron is a great director, because it's just a lot of cartoon characters waffling around the forest and having occasional fights.
And going into the water
I shouldn't like Mission Impossible, but I do, and it's because although it's a formula like, Bond's a formula which influenced Mission Impossible, the Bourne Identity's formula which is influenced by Bond.
Yeah.
Although it's a formula, it's done with such skill and verve and meticulous attention to detail by Tom Cruise that I really enjoyed them. So I was looking forward to this because I wasn't a Top Gun fan in the 80s, but Top Gun Maverick was really good because he managed to have fantastic stunts, great action, but also the characters were good and the emotional ideas about aging were handled really well. So I was quite surprised, and as you know, it did phenomenally well. And I thought maybe Mission Impossible do the same thing this year, and I don't think it will. And not because it isn't a good film, but because it doesn't add anything to any previous Mission Impossible film, except a little bit of pretension and a slight clunkiness, because it's aspiring to be a bit more deep than it normally is, which I think's a slight mistake in the long run. He shouldn't be going down that
psychology versus action, which became a big part of James Bond films, of course. Psychology
it's got,
more and more came into the James Bond films.
The problem is it's about AI. It's about the dangers of AI, which I know is a very trendy, Wendy subject to do a film about. He's right on, he's right on the curve with this. But I mean, it's an action film. At the end of the day, Mission Impossible is an action film where you have some human bits because of good characterization and good casting. You have a little bit of humor, but it's essentially an action film built on set pieces and showdowns with twists and turns in the plot of said set pieces and
some
showdowns.
Of them filmed in Yorkshire.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic sub-production.